Welcome to the Lila Life Show. I'm your host, Linda Andrews, and I'm so excited to bring to you Nicola Brown to the show today. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here with the Lila Life family.
Yay, what's up, fam? So I'm going to read a brief bio for you. You have an impressive background and like to give our listeners a point of reference. So you are a visionary voice in the intersection of some of my favorite things: science, creativity, and leadership. Renowned systemic designer, songwriter, entrepreneur, author, and coach. I was just listening to some of your streams just a moment ago, which we'll be sure to share. A Jamaican National with global ties, based in South Florida, previous academic, researcher, clinician, and serial entrepreneur, now the founder and CEO of KOKORO, revolutionizing how we cultivate innovation, connection, and purpose worldwide. Also a practitioner in residence at Bright Ventures, USGLC Next Gen Leader. And this multidisciplinary approach weaves ecology. These are my other favorite things: ecology, neuroscience, design principles, ancient wisdom, what up to the ancient wisdom, and self-leadership methodologies. A unique ability to synthesize diverse disciplines, empowering individuals and organizations to unlock full potential, catalyzing positive change. And you're invited today to come on this transformative journey with us. I think you have some pings here. And this whole connection between the natural world, human consciousness, and the art of living in harmony. And you know me, I like to spell harmony with an E. It's a pun. Get it? With like the money. I just am so curious about harmony and money. Oh, all of a sudden,
They're both energies that are critical to how we live and how we have relationships with each other.
yeah. So I've been hearing lately people saying we're going to have to do away with money. And I'm like, there may be a future where our monetary system changes, but you know what that day is not? Today.
Today.
Today. So we got money today. So
Yeah,
Nicola, I know we have some of your background, but just from your lens, what got you to this moment?
my family and the relationships that they put in my life early on. I see all the work that I do as coordinating relationships that are in our lives so
Mm,
that we can have better relationships as we live that we're choosing versus default status.
mm.
So, how do we choose to be in right relationship with each other? What is it like for me to be with you? What is it like for you to be with me? And how do we merge to make magic?
That feels like what could be possible. What could the highest expression of this look and feel like?
Exactly.
So
That's
is
that's how
that
our business partnerships have come.
yeah, is that coming from that? So your family of origin was modeling that? Did you have a sense of that early on? When was that light bulb moment for you that there was something bigger here?
I think the light bulb moment for me has been like watching how my parents have chosen to be in relationship with the people in their lives, both
Mm,
animate and inanimate, and like the level of care and intention they put towards everything. Um, from the choice to migrate to the US to setting up life where they chose to set up life here in South Florida to our global adventures with other family members, everything had an intention. And the biggest intention was like, how can we be with each other? What do we need to be with each other right now for
mhm.
it to be the best? And that doesn't mean that we're like a perfect family because we're far from it. It just means that we accepted what was. We didn't try to fight against it. It was like, these are the circumstances. What are we going to do with curiosity based on the circumstances that lay themselves in front of us?
Mhm.
And I feel like that created opportunity in a way that I wouldn't have necessarily come to easily, in the sense that it unlocked for me that there's always exploration and curiosity that can make something else be.
Mhm.
But it's like the pacing of that. Can I allow myself the attention to look at this a little more closely to
Mhm.
see what truly is here? Or am I going to discard it and move on to something else?
Mhm. There's something beautiful, and this wasn't necessarily my intention for this conversation, but you touching on family and how that was such an anchor in so much that has evolved in your own professional career. I look at the time that we're living in right now where fractures with family are so common. And as you were explaining some of the family dynamics, it was reminding me of when you're swimming upstream against the current or downstream with the current. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to what you see around the fractures and that imagery of upstream versus downstream. But those were a few things that were coming as insights.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Like, we definitely, how do I say this? Like, the fractures aren't new.
Hmm.
However, we're living in a day and time that we have new words and new
Mm.
ways of describing experiences, and being able to have those conversations opens up new doors that we haven't yet passed through. And
Mm.
so when I think about the swimming upstream,
Mhm.
is like we have gone downstream to look at how are we having conversations. There are things generationally and intergenerationally across cultures that traditionally we just didn't talk about.
Mm.
Money is one of those, right? We just didn't talk about it. It didn't mean that it wasn't a core part of our living existence. It
Mhm.
was just something that was off the table. And so, one of the things that I see that's happening now downstream and filtering upstream is like, if we have the conversation about the hard thing with the people that we love and care about, it makes it easier to have the conversation about the hard thing with people that we are not necessarily loving at the moment for a
Mhm.
myriad of reasons, right?
Mhm.
It allows space and it gives us capacity to be able to be to hear something that's different from our vantage point
Mhm.
and say, oh, okay, this is where you are. I can accept your point of view from your lived experience, just
Mhm.
like you can accept mine. And now, what might we create together? And the family is like the nice incubator of that. Like, we all have wild ideas. Think about your cousins, think about your siblings. You don't agree all the time. So, why would you go out into the world and expect agreement all the time?
Such a beautiful perspective. I'm obsessed with this. And the money piece, it's such a dense conversation. I think specifically to founders, this conversation is so critical for a number of reasons. One, if your business is going to be successful, profitability, long-term growth of some kind is having to be in the projections and action. And then the personal side of this, where if your personal finances are in disarray, it could derail the whole business venture, and really vice versa, right? That it all connects and goes together. It feels like the infinity symbol to me. It's like, gotta get that side and that side and that side. And I find where to begin. Like, where do you begin? The answer is you start. You start. And I'd love to hear you do so much work as well around the money and the money mindset. But where do you tell people to begin? And I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
I like to tell people to begin with what is the last purchase that you made? What was
Mm.
going through your mind as you made that purchase? How did it feel in your body? And what did that purchase allow for to be? So oftentimes we're spending money to allow for something else to
Mhm.
be. And we're either focused on that thing that we want in the future, or we're minutely focused on, okay, if I spend this money, what does that mean? And it's not the future that you're thinking about that you desire. It's like
Mm.
the future of fear, right? And
Mm.
so if you're able to come to present and say, I'm making this decision out of fear. If you can acknowledge that to yourself, that then unlocks space. But oftentimes when you're feeling fear, you're like, maybe if I act like I'm not feeling this fear, then it will go away. And actually, it does the opposite. It becomes a monster. And it's like, hi, I want to say hello to you. I'm fear. I've been waiting for you to acknowledge me for quite some time. So I always ask you to start with what was a recent purchase? And what were the emotions and thought processes that you went through to come towards making that purchase? And for us to even be talking today, right? Let's think about all the purchases that had to be made. We
Mhm.
had to buy mics. We had to buy scheduling software.
Mhm.
We had to buy this digital platform that we're speaking on. But in the moment, you're not necessarily thinking about all of the money that has been spent. You're looking
Mhm.
at the immediacy of like, I need to spend one more time on this.
Mhm.
And so becoming present with that is one thing. And then the
Mhm.
other thing is to look at in your family of origin,
Mhm.
what was the relationship to money? Was it feast and famine? Or was it like Jubilee and we have money, we don't? Or did you not even know the status of money in your family of origin
Mhm.
because your family was content no matter what?
Mhm.
And personally, I was in the latter type of household. I didn't know our finances until I was going away to college and
Mhm.
we had to do a FAFSA. I had no clue where our family fell. My basic needs were met, it was taken care of, and
Mhm.
that was it. So,
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because that transition into early adulthood based on the experience of family of origin and post college or post high school landing, independent of the family of origin, and kind of what track that. And I graduated high school in '05, college in '09. And so it's
mhm.
been a while since I went through that transition. And I can only imagine how it could feel even more intense now, just how some of the world is shifting with different macroeconomics
Yeah,
and how confusing, like the word as you're talking that keeps coming up is confusing, confusing. It's so confusing.
I would say that's what founders feel when they take a leap from employment into building a business. It's
Mm-hmm.
completely confusing and disorienting
Mm-hmm.
because the things that made sense in one context don't necessarily make sense in the next.
Mm-hmm.
You're making decisions in different ways, even though you might be looking at the same components.
Mm-hmm.
The context is different. And so, one of the things that I would say is helpful for me to stabilize in a different context is like acknowledging this context is different. What are my skills that have worked in previous contexts that I can apply here?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know I got skills, but I just don't know how to apply them.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of that is the pacing, some of that is talking to friends like you of
Mm-hmm.
like, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm looking to understand. How might you look at this differently? And the perspective taking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the core component as an entrepreneur and building a venture is like, who is your circle? And
Mm-hmm.
how is that circle feeding into you? And how are you feeding into that circle? Because it is that infinity loop of relationship.
That's so interesting. I get big glimpses of this feeling where within the founder life cycle, there's so much support and abundance and desire to help each other. And I've noticed through my own personal patterning, it can bring up such a inverse of that scarcity, fear, I can't trust anyone response for many reasons. I won't get into them all, but it's like the taste of, wow, people really care. They really want to help me. They will give anything. And then it's like my own personal, like, sup, fire signals, like, get out of here. And I've had to do my own inner work to understand even that patterning. But it's as you're saying that, and the infinity and creating that support is so powerful. And it can be a transition to even get to that point, depending on past elements of life.
Yeah. I would say like some of our greatest harm happens in community, and
Oh yeah.
and and some of our greatest restoration
Hmm.
happens in community.
AKA exposure therapy.
Right. That's why exposure therapy works, right? And so part of that is that in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the global entrepreneurial ecosystem, there is that cadence of like, there's a lot of resources here and there's no resources here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is anxiety provoking
Mm-hmm.
in the worst of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has been helpful to try and trace is like, when in the year are the resources available?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like anything, like nature, we don't have all the things all the seasons. And so, if we can track the seasons to your industry, to the venture that you are trying to raise capital for,
Mm-hmm.
if you can track those seasons, then we ride those waves of patterning differently.
Mm-hmm.
Often we're so far in the deep end on the waves that it's really hard to see what the pattern is because
Mm-hmm.
we're in the thick of it. And so it's helpful to talk to someone in the industry, out your industry, and just ask them, what are some of the patterns that you're noticing in your business?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they talk about their patterns will give you ways to look at your own business to see what are the patterns that I could notice that I probably wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
without that insight and without this conversation. And so the convenience of conversation shifts from season to season, how we prioritize it. There's certain seasons you're fundraising, you're prioritizing conversations all the time. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
where can I talk to an investor? How many networking things can I go to? And then you go through a drought, either for overload, because not everyone is organized internally to have that many conversations in rapid succession. And so you need to retreat to recharge. And then how do you reintegrate? We saw that a lot with the pandemic. How do we reintegrate after taking time away to recharge?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's some of the dance is like mimicking the seasonal pattern that makes sense for you and your industry, because the common component is going to be you in your life and in your business.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one you. So what do you understand about you that you can then impart into these two categories so that you can move well?
And I would add in that as you're talking, it was reminding me of where's your own personal energy at, right? Like if you're in a winter and fundraising's at a summer, what do you need to do to make some adjustments? Are you missing this season?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that the skill of anticipation, like as you're saying with the founders, um, preparing, say, administratively to have large volume of fundraising conversations, anticipating a bit of what that is going to feel like. And maybe you're not naturally used to that load of conversations and supporting yourself in a different way. The more and more I see patterns play out, I'm like, an ounce of anticipation would have gone a long way here.
Yeah, it's the strategic foresight. But
Mm-hmm.
we often think about doing it later in the continuum of things. It's like, I will do this later when I arrive at this point. Not
Mm-hmm.
not currently. It's like, no, in the future, when our business is stabilized, then I can think about the future. Right now, I just need to double down. And instead of it being an either or, it's more of both and. It's like, what are my steps today influencing in the future? What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? What future are we casting today
Mm-hmm.
that we're not aware of? Because everything that we do has a ripple action.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of our work is focused as a company is focused on that ripple. Like, everything you do have a ripple. What is your ripple? What is
Mm-hmm.
that going to look like?
I love it. I'm curious for you with ecology and how that connects to design, neuroscience, ancient wisdom, beyond
Uh,
what you've already shared with the seasons.
I mean, all the things. So, ecology is a systemic way of thinking and being. And it means that there are lots of systems that will be interconnected. And for us to be human, there are lots of systems within our bodies that allow us to be that, right? Our neurological system has to talk to our gut and our brain and allow us to have this conversation in the way that we're having it. And that then factors into how our brain processes. And a lot of the times, we're not thinking about those connections because they're not visible.
Mm-hmm.
They're the things that are happening behind the screen that things are happening behind the screen. You have that awareness,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have that understanding of what is happening behind the screen and how that is allowing your capabilities to be what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of ancient wisdom, a lot of spiritual disciplines and faith communities are like, they're things that we'll never know and understand. And can we accept that as we focus in on the things that we can understand? Like, I can understand certain things very acutely, like the supply chain for my fruits and vegetables that I then purchase at the grocery store. I can spend time and understand what farms they grew on, when they were harvested, etc., to complete that continuum. And there are other things that I will never understand. Like, I will never understand the full breaking up of life that happens when someone passes,
Mm-hmm.
or how grief manifests in my body. I will never fully understand it. I will come to some knowing of it, but the understanding is beyond my capability. It's beyond the science.
Mm-hmm.
It's something greater than me.
Mm-hmm.
Or when we get together, like we did earlier, and we set intentions, we never know how the intentions actually become real.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there isn't a checklist to say, all right, we set an intention to have fun. So next up, step one,
Oh,
walk
you're
out
on
the door.
pace. You're on pace.
It's like, we'll have fun and you know it will happen, but you don't know how. And some that's the magic of living, is like, you don't need to know all the hows,
Mm-hmm.
yet we think we do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I'm tracking. What about diplomacy and entrepreneurship? What does that mean to you?
so many entrepreneurs are I would say accidental diplomats,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that if you import or export, you had to work with another country.
Mm-hmm.
There are foreign trade agreements that are in place to support your access to certain markets, etc. And oftentimes you don't think about it. For the traditional entrepreneur, especially in tech, you don't think about what had to happen, what negotiations, what policies needed to be put in place to allow for someone in Canada to purchase your technology and implement it in their tech infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
or for someone in Chile to purchase your crops from here in Florida and then sell it in their local grocery store. Or for all of the imports, for all of the things that are made in, and you see another country there on your product, what had to be in place to allow for that to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Often we just think about diplomacy as the piecework that happens after discord or after a hurricane or natural disaster, and not the pieces and I like to think about it like the mycelium network of mushrooms that's
Mhm.
happening all the time
Mhm.
that you only see activated when they're big things.
Mhm.
So that's diplomacy. It's the networks that allow us to have a global life and have global systems and connectivity and resource share
Mhm.
that you would never see or notice, but for thinking about, can my business impact someone else around the world the same way it's impacting someone domestically here in the US?
Mhm.
And I think as we become more and more global, it's critical for us to think about that.
Mhm.
Like, how do we impact domestically and abroad in
Mhm.
right relationship? So,
Mhm.
not just saying, rah, your tool, your solution will just be adopted. It's like, how do we make solutions that are adaptable to the environment?
Mhm.
And that then allows it to be diplomatic.
Yeah, we don't have, it's not that it's predominantly a global audience, but we do have a global audience here at the Lila Life Show. And I think about this often. It's a privilege to be sharing these conversations and ideas globally. And with that comes a responsibility. And there's many different cultures around the world. And Americans are about 4.5% of the global population. I let it be up to the listener to translate how to integrate these concepts into their own life, knowing that I have a limited perspective from my own experiences that have gotten me to this exact now moment. But I do think about this a lot, and I know that's a different shift of diplomacy than, but on some level, we're shipping something, through the audio waves, and it's something that I think about a lot, actually, and what that means. And it's probably a work in progress as it is for many. But yeah, I
Yeah,
imagine it can get easier and easier in theory to be having the access to these global networks. And what you're making me think of too is all of the historical, whether policy, activism, all the elements that went in to make the world what it is today, for better or for worse. There's
exactly.
a lot there.
Hmm.
A lot there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like we often think big as
Mhm.
like, what is my company doing in this big way on this global scale?
Mhm.
And I encourage us to think a little smaller and a little closer.
Mhm.
Is like, globally, who do I work with
Mhm.
in my business that allows this to continue, this ripple to happen?
Mhm.
So, do you have contractors that are based outside of the US?
Mhm.
Do you have partners that are based outside? That is supporting other economies. You're
Mhm.
supporting the US economy and you are supporting the global economy simultaneously, and we're also supporting like culture development.
Mhm.
We know that what we see on television is a smidget of our relationships, and by doing business with other people, we're learning more about their cultures. We're learning new insights and ways of being that
Mhm.
then influence the products that we create and
Mhm.
the technology, because we know together that a lot of the businesses are solving for things that they have lived.
Mhm.
And so, if you expand how you live, imagine how we would solve these wicked problems differently
Mhm.
that are pervasive in society.
Yeah, and my worst nightmare is the exporting of America's bad habits. Like
Isn't
when that
that
one
true?
that one keeps me up at night. I'm like, no, don't let it go any further.
Yeah.
Uh, so my last question for you, and I would love to spotlight some of the work of KOKORO and some of your amazing products and where people can find you. But if you could speak to, and this would probably be a follow-up episode, how you interpret conversation design for well living and what that means to you and how people can apply that, whether in their life or business.
Mm,
And I
thank you.
have a sense that this segues into some of the products that KOKORO offers.
Thank you for that question. Conversation design for well living. Think about the conversation that you really want to have and what hinders you from having it. Often the response is time, or it's the afraid of discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty about how that conversation may go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got me really interested and curious of like, I've been able to have hard conversations that have supported me to live well. What are the components of that? What allows that to be? And how do we pace that in our very rapidly moving society? And that led us to play, like Lila Life, like play
Mm-hmm.
allows us, while you're playing with each other, you're like, oh yeah, I did want to talk about this. Let's talk about it. And the conversation takes on a different shape than if we were to sit down face to face and say, I want to talk about this thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one way. So we think about the conversation design as to what is the intent of this relationship? Who's in this relationship? What is the intent of it? How do we then structure the questions that will then facilitate this dialogue? That's how we see it here at KOKORO. And we support that in a myriad of ways. So we support the design from 0 to 1 of the conversations for within your organization for team development of our current 21st century skills and the mindsets that we need to be malleable, resilient, and adaptable in today's society. And we also have tangible products. So we have our platform that allows you to measure, monitor, and maintain your well being and your mindset through scientifically based and research prompts that allows you to then reflect over time and compare apples to apples versus apples to oranges. A lot of platforms compare you to other people. You're comparing to yourself. So you set your own baseline and then you work towards where you would like to be against yourself
Mm-hmm.
versus someone else. And then you have conversations in your peer groups around what others are noticing about themselves and how you are choosing to be in relationship with each other based on these new insights. And then lastly, we have our playing card deck, which is called Quotation Quest. And it takes you on a journey of quotations that allows for you to play quotation telephone as one example for those that are nostalgic of the 80s that used to play telephone. We have a quotation version of it that allows you to use that as a conversation starter for those introverts and those with social anxiety that are thinking about how to start a conversation. It becomes a conversation starter tool. It also becomes a relationship maintenance tool. It's been a while since you've had a conversation with depth and you're like, I don't know how to jump in there. It becomes a conduit for that. And lastly, on Spotify and all media platforms, we have our sonic journeys, which are contemplative prompts and proses that allow you in the flow of your life to come to present. So a lot of the times we're asking for mindfulness where you're carving out time to do it. These sonic journeys, we anticipate that you're doing this as you're working. You're doing this as you're moving so that it can integrate into your life and not be a separate side thing. So that's how we believe that we're designing conversations, is that we're doing it in the flow of your life. What are the conversations that make you and your life your life?
So good, so good. We'll have all that in the show notes. The sonic journey, I love the ring of that. I really do. And for some people, like whether it's pumping up for an event or speaking, I mean, there's so many ways, pumping up and calming down at the same time that I see that utility. Amazing. And speaking of quotations, any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners today? Nicola, this has been a true honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The quotation that I'll leave you with is the only journey is the one within. And that comes from Rilke. And it's like, no matter what we're doing externally, our internal development has to match it or we won't accomplish what we desire externally. So
Mm.
take the time to develop inwardly with others. Don't just do it alone. We
Mm.
need others to win and to live well.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning
Thank
into
you.
this episode of the Lila Life Show, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Nicola. Signing off.
Thanks, Linda.